son and a kid who identifies as non-binary. My sibling is trans and non-binary, and I'm the aunt of a trans kid, and I have many gender diverse friends and colleagues. So, both personally and professionally, this is an issue that is really near and dear to my heart. And I'm fairly new to the crypto and NFT space, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. But I originally got interested because of Outright Action International about 6 months ago. And well, our story is we're a 31-year-old organization that has, for our entire existence, been fighting against the persecution, inequality, and violence that LGBTIQ plus people face around the world. And the reason why we are doing this is because the journey for full rights and equality for our community has far to go in every country, including the US where I'm based. There are huge disparities. And one thing that surprised me, even as someone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community, is that I had no idea there are still 67 countries that have laws that outlaw and criminalize same sex relations. 67. 11 of those impose a death penalty. There are still 50 countries that have laws that criminalize transgender people, and only 6 countries, I think 7 actually, since the last time I spoke to all of you, that have had another country join, but there are only 7 countries that ban conversion practices, which are traumatic and abusive practices that can be mentally or physically abusive to try to change people's sexual orientation and gender identity. And there are a lot of places in the world where even having a call like this or a meeting like this could be cause for arrest, and definitely censorship. The free and open discussion of who we are and who we love would be cause for censorship or potentially even arrest. But despite all of that, we have seen a huge amount of progress. I know personally, I have benefited from, when I came out in college 25 years ago, there were still places in the US where homosexuality was criminalized. We did not have, don't ask, don't tell was a policy in our military. Marriage equality was not a thing yet. And I never thought that one day I would be able to get married to my wife, have 3 kids legally, that we both are equal parents, and to see so much progress. That doesn't mean that we have fixed everything. We still have a huge amount of threats facing our community, especially people of color and trans people in our community in the US. But we have seen a huge amount of progress, and not just in the US. We've seen progress in so many places around the world, even places you would not even imagine. We've had 15 countries that have decriminalized homosexuality in the last 10 years. There are 29 countries that have passed or codified marriage equality. 16 of those have happened in the last 5 years. And a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization removed being transgender as a mental illness. So basically, why I am so passionate right now is that there is a huge opportunity to radically accelerate social and legal change right now. And that's where Outright comes in. So basically, we do 3 things. The first is that we do research. We conduct a lot of research and publish research because there's not very much data about what our community is going through and the needs of our community around the world. We need that data to push for change. We need it to push for legal change, and we need it to get access to funding for our communities. So we collect and publish data, and we document human rights abuses. We just put out a report a couple of weeks ago based on interviews with LGBTQ Afghans about what's happening there with the return of the Taliban. And we've produced hundreds of reports on conversion therapy, digital censorship, how pride is celebrated and attacked around the world, and the impact of COVID, amongst other things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we support the LGBTIQ movement. And by that, I mean supporting activists and organizations that are on the front lines at the grassroots level everywhere in the world. And that's because we believe that having strong organizations and activists in our community and fighting for our community is the single greatest factor that will produce change. So we have training, we provide training, technical assistance, and grant making to hundreds of activists every year. And then the third thing we do is advocacy. And the reality is that for queer and trans people who are facing really extreme persecution, discrimination, and violence, we know that international pressure is essential to stop human rights violations, and they need somewhere to go for redress and to codify changes. So we focus at the United Nations headquarters in New York. That's why we're based in New York. We have a permanent consultative status, or the only LGBTQ organization that has consultative status at UN headquarters, and we coordinate a group of about 37 countries or member states that are working with us to advance equality within the United Nations system. And the reason why that matters is, a lot of people don't understand exactly how the UN works and why it's important, but a huge amount of funding goes through the UN and UN agencies in humanitarian crises and for development. And we have to make sure that some of that reaches our communities and that LGBTIQ people are not left behind. Um, so we also have to be there to insist that you might remember Hillary Clinton at one point, said, I think 20 or 30 years ago, women's rights are human rights. We have to be there to insist that LGBTIQ rights are human rights. So we're headquartered in New York. We have staff in about 10 countries. Some of our programs are very global in nature, like our COVID response. We created an emergency fund for COVID, and we have distributed about $3.5 million so far in over 100 countries to support queer and trans people during the pandemic. Other programs are really specific to a region or country. We have a big project in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa to try to combat conversion therapy practices. We have a big project in the Middle East and North Africa called our Arabic Media Project that's working on creating more affirming and neutral reporting and storytelling about LGBTIQ people. We have a big project in the Caribbean that's working on legal gender identity recognition, and we have projects in Indonesia and Sudan work with local organizations to prevent the criminalization of homosexuality. Those are just some examples. That's outright. Um, and I also wanted to kind of share why and how we got into the crypto and NFT space, but I can do that now, or I could just pause and see if people have questions. What do you think?
I think you should go ahead and just tell them what got you into the NFT space.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep going.
Yeah, just keep going. This is great. I love
Well,
it.
I won't go too much longer because I do want to see what kinds of questions people have. But um, basically, at heart, we are activists, and some of us are artists or see ourselves as artivists, but we really aren't, on the cutting edge of Web 3.0. But as queer and trans people, we're very good at thinking outside the norm and being creative and surviving in unlikely circumstances. And I think the bottom line is that we really believe that this is a moment of opportunity for progress, but we need many more people to pay attention, see what's happening around the world, and to join us. And that's because our entire movement is incredibly under-resourced. Even in the US, about 28 cents out of every $100 in terms of philanthropic funding, 28 cents out of every $100 goes to LGBTIQ causes. That's in the US. US is probably the best place in the world in terms of funding our movement, and that's how bad it is here. It's much worse when you look outside the US and Canada to other parts of the world. So I have been helping outright look for and partner with artists, creators, and projects that want to be a part of our movement and help us take advantage of this moment to really push forward equality. And I see it as a really exciting um, kind of win-win because we can raise more funds to fuel our work, we can reach new people, and we can also support artists and creators and projects that care about diversity, inclusion, and our community. So I think the last thing I would just share is that I did not expect personally to be so drawn in and to have so much fun and basically become addicted to it. I just had no idea how much I was going to learn and how much creativity and joy it would bring to my life. So I've become an NFT collector because of this work. And I have, gotten comfortable with speaking, and even I hosted my first Twitter Spaces last week, which is like, oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I unfortunately I got rugged right at the end of it, and so it ended the Spaces early. So I have a few things to figure out in terms of being a good host, but I've been learning so much. I've been starting to collect NFTs. I've been telling my friends about this space and how fun it is, and how much creativity is here, and how much how much I love the community that I'm tapping into. And I would say that's also just one of the reasons why your project and your community, I think, is so fantastic, and I love watching what you're doing. So I'm going to stop there and put a few links in the chat to some information about Outright, one of our videos, and happy to take some questions.
So, Katie, there is a question by Nate. He asked, "What's the 28 cents over $100 compared to other broader causes?
That's a
Like,
great,
how does that?" Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head to answer that question, but I can put the link to the research behind that, Nate. And I mean, I can look at it later too, but I can also just share the link to the research so you can see it, um, and how it compares to other causes as well. So should I put these in the general chat or the flight deck chat?
You could post it in the flight deck check. It seems like people are chatting in there.
Okay.
And then somebody else, Agent R, asked, "What does the work you do in the US look like compared to other countries?"
Ooh, okay, that is not going to work for me. I have to do that one by one. Um, so we don't work in the US. What we do in the US is public education. So trying to raise visibility and aware to get people to pay attention to what's happening around the world. And then, of course, the work that we're doing at the United Nations is in New York. So that work happens to be in the US because that's where the United Nations headquarters is. We're in the process of hiring someone in Washington, D.C. that can look at pressuring pressuring and encouraging the US government to do more to support the global LGBTIQ movement. But really, our focus is outside of the US, outside of Canada, outside of Western Europe, outside of Australia and New Zealand. We are focused on the global South and the global East because those regions of the world have much less resources. If you look at where the most sort of dire dire situations are in terms of legal legal discrimination and violence, it tends to be in those areas. And there are also a lot of vibrant LGBTIQ organizations here in the US and in some of those other places that I mentioned. So we're really focusing on the parts of the world that are experiencing more extreme persecution, discrimination, and violence, and where there are less resources and attention.
Necrotic had a very good question. He's been asking all the charities this. In what percentage of fundraising / budget goes towards administration and advertising for your organization?
I believe the total that goes to management and administrative expenses is about 25%. I can also post a link to that in the chat as well.
Today, it seems everyone's fairly quiet today. Trying to see what else there is to say.
There we go. Do you mean what would we use it for? Well, I think having funds that are unrestricted is always really helpful because then we can use it wherever it's most needed at the time. So that could be for our COVID response work in our emergency fund, or it could be for the work that we're doing to support trans people and trans rights organizations around the world, or it could be getting ready to launch a new program next month that's specifically going to support queer women and queer women activists. So at the same time, I will say that, sometimes we have donors who want to direct their support to a specific program or area, and that's fine too. If there's something that you're more interested in funding, be it, um, advocacy work at the UN or supporting trans communities or supporting COVID response or supporting anti-conversion therapy work or, whatever it is, like we're happy to direct direct your support to whatever is most appealing to this community. But generally speaking, it's wonderful to have funds that are unrestricted because then we can apply them, to support all of our programs or to respond, if we're doing something that's very time sensitive, like the report that we just did. We spent 3 months doing interviews of Afghans or LGBT Afghans. If we have something really, time sensitive or specific that we need to do quickly that we haven't been able to go out and promote and get a lot of support for, then we can put the funds towards that. Up that research, Nate, so I can put that in the chat as well. Yes. Just there we go. Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of nerdy. I think just to be perfectly honest with you. Um, and if you were to follow our Twitter or, and unlike a lot of maybe better known or bigger LGBTIQ organizations, I think sometimes the information that we share can be kind of wonky and nerdy, which is I love it, but sometimes I'm like, we translate this, make it maybe, make it more sense to a broader range of people. But that's because, we are really focused, like I said, in trying to do really solid research that because there isn't a lot of information about our community. So like when I think everyone had a sense that when Afghanistan went back into the control of the Taliban, it wasn't going to be good for LGBTIQ people. But we wanted to say, okay, but we need to actually go do the research to find out what's happening. We don't want to um, go out and do the advocacy work that we know is going to change policies, laws, etc., without it being based in evidence. And so that's why we did that project. And I would say that, in the first 10 or 15 years that Outright was around, a lot of the research was more documenting human rights abuses like the Afghanistan report that I mentioned, and writing briefs about different kinds of human rights violations that were happening around the world. And what we've shifted to now in the past 5 or 10 years, we still do that in some situations, like with Afghanistan, because we felt that otherwise that data wouldn't be there, and it can be extremely important in putting international pressure on governments to hold the Taliban accountable and to make sure that humanitarian assistance is reaching LGBTIQ communities and to prioritize evacuation and resettlement of LGBTIQ people. Like that's not something that we do, but we have partner organizations that do that. And just for instance, the US hasn't resettled any LGBTIQ people from Afghanistan yet, but we know that they're experiencing a lot of violence and human rights violations. So with that data, we can put pressure on the US and other countries to increase the number of refugees that they are resettling from Afghanistan. And we can make sure that funding, attention and funding goes to our community there. But we also have started doing more sort of what I would call sort of global mapping studies, where we look at an issue like conversion therapy, conversion practices, and we say, we know that this is a problem. We know that this has been a problem in the US. We know that this is a problem in many parts of the world, but we don't have any studies that really look at it on a global scale. So 2 or 3 years ago, we published and I can put a link to this in the chat as well, but we published a very large report looking at the incidence and impact of conversion therapy everywhere in the world. And then, another good example is, again, this is from a couple of years ago, we did a mapping project to look at every country, 193 countries in the world, where can LGBTIQ organizations legally register? Where can they not legally register? Where can they register, but they have to be youth organizations or business organizations or social organizations? And it was the first time anyone did something like that, to sort of map where is our movement, and where are there places where we found there were 18 countries, mostly in Central Africa, where there's not a single LGBTIQ organization. There's about 30 countries in the world. I will say that was 2 or 3 years ago. It's probably changed by now because things are moving so quickly. 2 or 3 years ago, there were 30 countries in the world, 18 of them in Central Africa, that didn't have a single LGBTIQ organization. That's really helpful to know, so we can, when we're talking about leveraging more funding for the movement, or we're talking about our own work to support LGBTIQ activism and movement building, we are really focused now on trying to do more work in that region, because it's clearly under resourced, and there's obviously LGBTIQ people there, but there's not a single organization that's there serving or fighting for the community. So it was something that could point out where those gaps are, and help us think about, how we can move forward to make sure that the movement and our community is getting the support it needs everywhere. Same thing with COVID. We did a big project right when the pandemic started to try to basically report through a series of interviews with dozens of activists in various countries what was happening in the first month or two of COVID. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that in the response to COVID, the governments and the humanitarian relief organizations that were mounting response would not leave our communities behind, because that's what usually happens. And because they may be faith-based organizations, or they may be it may be, sometimes it might be intentional exclusion, and sometimes it's just um, they don't even, they're just not thinking about strategically about how to include and make sure that LGBTIQ people are being served and reached. Um, so those are some examples of the research that we've done. We just did a report last year on digital censorship, where we looked at 6 different countries that are dealing with online censorship, and how that, why that's happening, and how that's happening, and how activists are working around that. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but those are some examples, and I'll put a link in the chat so you can go directly to see what kinds of reports and research we've released in the past year or two as well.
Thank you so much. And that Agent R had another fantastic question. What are some programs that you've done or worked with in the global Southeast alongside researched with Outright?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple that I would just mention that I mentioned in passing. We have a staff person who in Indonesia who is working specifically with local queer and trans organizations, which there are actually a lot of them in Indonesia. But they're working to try to prevent a new law criminalizing. Homosexuality is not criminalized right now in Indonesia, but there has been the LGBTIQ community has been very concerned that a new law will be proposed to outlaw homosexuality there. And so we've been working on a project with activists there to to strengthen the local community and do some public education campaigns to try to prevent that from happening. Um, in Sudan, we have been working with activists there because they're in the process of writing a new constitution, and so we felt and heard from the community there that there was an opportunity to try to make sure that homosexuality was not criminalized in the new constitution. So we've been working really closely with activists there. I already mentioned this, but in the Caribbean, we have a couple of staff people there, and we have helped launch and support several of the first LGBTIQ organizations in the region, the first trans organization in Jamaica, the first regional LGBTIQ kind of coalition in the Caribbean. And right now, what we're really focusing on there is legal gender identity recognition, because because the activists there have asked us to help with that, and we see that there's an opportunity to um, try to make progress in that area. Um, I think the biggest thing is that, we don't believe that solutions can be parachuted in from anywhere, and that the most important thing is to listen to the local community and to go where they're asking us to go. And they're the ones who know what's happening in their local context. They're the ones who identify solutions. I think our role is to try to provide funding, technical assistance, and training, and to help connect activists in different parts of the world so that they can talk to each other and share best practices. One really cool example is we have a number of training programs which we of course have been doing them virtually over the last couple of years, but we have several fellowship programs where we bring activists to New York and into the UN system to advocate at the UN, and to learn more about how to advocate and actually to be there and to take up space and to share what's going on in their communities and demands and the needs of their communities with diplomats at the UN. And we have a religion fellowship program, which if you look at our Twitter page, you'll see we just announced that class or cohort of activists last week. We have 8 activists from different parts of the world that are specifically fighting religiously motivated violence and homophobia and transphobia. We have a new program that's going to be launching next month that is going to support 100 queer women activists and trans women activists, specifically from the global South and East. And then we have an advocacy week that we do every year in New York around Human Rights Day in December. And we bring about 50 or 60 activists in from all over the world into the UN. And we host a big conference called Out Summit, we've been doing that virtually for the past couple of years, but hopefully we'll be able to. The benefit of that is that we've had so many more people participate. Usually we have 50 or 60 activists come to New York. Last year we had over 1,500 from over 100 countries that could tune in virtually and build community with each other, talk about what are some of the emerging trends happening, and sort of identify strategies of working together. But one example I like to give from our Out Summit conference a couple of years ago, we had our keynote speakers were the 2 lead attorneys in the case that went to the Supreme Court in India that overturned, that decriminalized homosexuality. And I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was in 2018, and their Supreme Court unanimously struck down their, which by the way, it was a colonial era law. A lot of the remaining laws that outlaw homosexuality are part of the legacy of colonialism. And that law was struck down unanimously, and we had the 2 attorneys who were the lead attorneys on that case as our keynote speakers for Out Summit. What was amazing was they were able to share their story, and then in the group of activists that we had brought to New York, we had one of the lead attorneys on a similar case in Singapore and the executive director of the Human Rights Commission in Kenya, which were they both had similar cases working through their courts that were based on the same British law. And they were able to all talk to each other and talk with the attorneys from India about how that case went. So I get so passionate that I just kind of keep rambling. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer to your question, but those are just some examples. And I think the main thing is that we never, ever, we don't do a program and then take it somewhere and say, hey, everyone should do this, or this is what you should do. It's always about the local community saying what they need and then what kind of support can we provide to them, and how can we work in partnership with them. One last example I'll give of that is I mentioned that we're doing this project around ending conversion therapy practices in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. That is done, it was proposed and done and is being done completely in partnership with organizations in those 3 countries that have been working in the community on this issue for a very long time. And next week, actually, we're launching the report, the results of our research, the research that we've been doing over the past couple of years about what conversion practices look like in those 3 countries, and how we can try to change, not only change the laws, but also try to change the sort of level of acceptance and the stigma that people face. Because even if you ban conversion therapy, you also need to eradicate the demand for conversion therapy, right? So it's a project that's both looking at legal change but also social change. Oh my gosh, you guys are asking such good questions. um, so, and I don't even know, I'm going to do my best to answer them, but I might have to get back to you. I might have to consult with some of my program colleagues and get back to you about some of this. But basically, like I said, we never go anywhere without being asked. So a good example is, I mentioned that we helped start the first trans organization and the first regional um, LGBTQ coalition in the Caribbean. That is because we have relationships with activists in that region who asked for our support in doing that. And what that looked like, some of what that support looks like is providing seed funding so that they can get, office space if they need to get office space, or pay legal fees to get their organization registered with the government, or maybe hire their first staff person, or start to pay someone part-time for the work that they're doing. It is giving them advice on like how do we, like, what do we do, to what kind of paperwork do we need to file with the government, how do we put together a board of directors for an organization. And sometimes it's providing training, which could be anything from um, you know training on advocacy, like how do you go to your local government, or how do you go to your diplomats from your country, or maybe you can't even meet with diplomats from your country at the UN, but you can meet with someone from a neighboring country. We have some activists who come to participate in our advocacy week at the UN, and they can't get a meeting with representatives from their country. They won't meet. They might not be willing to meet with them, but they can meet with. They could meet with like a lot of our activists from Africa, for instance. They might be able to meet with the mission, the South Africa mission, for example, if they can't meet with the mission from their own country. Or maybe they can meet with the Netherlands mission, because Netherlands is an important ally and trade partner to their country. So we would provide training on how do you do that? How do you start to think about making requests for those meetings? How do you start to think about what you would want to share, and what kind of pitch you would want to make, and what kind of demands you would want to make at those meetings? Sometimes it's training about a lot of times it's training about very basic safety and security, like, because the online censorship and the online security is really obviously an issue everywhere. It can be a very big issue for a lot of our activists. So how do you set up secure ways of communicating with each other that are not, especially if you're in an environment where doing this work could put your life at risk, right? Or could put the existence of your organization at risk, or you could risk being arrested for the work that you're doing. So we help them give training on, how can you be communicating? What are some of the communication systems you can set up? How can you make sure that if you have a physical location that it is safe? In some cases, we've had to give small grants to try to help support organizations that have been attacked. And one good example of that is our partner organization in Lebanon, which that was not a LGBTQ specific attack, but in the explosions that happened a couple of years ago, their offices were destroyed. So we were able to give a grant to kind of help them with that. So I don't know if I kind of lost track of what the original question is, but hopefully I provided some basic idea of how we help organizations get up and off the ground. There are, I would say, yes, we go where we're asked, but also sometimes our research identifies an area that, like I mentioned, Central Africa, where it's not that there's nothing happening, but there's a lot of places where we know that there LGBTIQ people are there, obviously, and that there's underground activism happening. But how can then we just ask, how can we provide support? Maybe you're not going to legally register your organizations, but what kind of support can we provide, even if it's kind of on an underground basis, to people that are trying to create some momentum in the community there? So again, I'm not sure if I'm totally answered your question, but those are the first things that came to mind when I was thinking about how we support emerging organizations and what kind of training we provide.
Now is the time. If anyone wants to speak in the audience, if they want to come up on stage and ask questions, feel free.
Oh, I see somebody asked about the COVID emergency fund. Yeah, I'll put that in the chat as well. But I guess I would just start by saying, even pre-pandemic, might not be surprised to know that when you look at sort of social health and economic indicators, the LGBTIQ community tends to fare more poorly than sort of the mainstream population on a lot of indicators, social and economic and health indicators. But COVID really exposed a lot of the sort of at-risk issues that our community has been facing with. So what we found in our research that we did in the first couple months of the pandemic was, extreme loss of food, loss of income and work, loss of both for organizations and also individuals, oftentimes loss of housing. We saw a lot of, and then this got more marked, I think, the further that we went into the pandemic, not just for LGBTIQ people, but in general, mental health issues. We saw in some places the LGBTIQ community sort of being scapegoated or blamed for COVID. LGBTIQ organizations, like a lot of smaller nonprofit organizations, were really at risk of closing and survival, I would say, organizational survival of the movement in general. A lot of people didn't have access to medication, HIV medication, and other types of, hormone therapy and other types of medications. So healthcare, not having access to healthcare, not having access to medication was a huge issue. These are all sort of like some of the initial things that we saw happening at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think over time, those things continued. We also saw more increased isolation and need for mental health support. A lot of queer and trans people were forced to live with family, perhaps, who are not supportive. they may or may not be out to, and if they were out or had been outed, we're not supportive of them. So that was definitely a really big issue for a lot of folks in our community. Um, yeah, those are some of the things, and if you follow that link to our COVID response, you can click through to the report that we did that presented some of that research about what has been happening in our community. The emergency fund was really great, and we're getting ready to do a new round of grants in a few weeks that are focusing on vaccine awareness and education and equitable access to vaccines for the LGBTIQ community. And we issued a call for applications for that in November, December. We've processed all of those, and we're in the kind of final stages of getting ready to make a new round of grants that will be specifically focused on getting vaccines and vaccine awareness to our community.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? This is really quiet on my phone tonight. I can hardly hear anything that people are saying, but can you hear me?
Yes, it's very quiet, but I can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Wow. Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely to listen to your, you know, everything that's going on in everybody's lives and it's just nice to talk to people from all over the world and different places and while I'm sitting here in my house in Wales, I can speak to everybody. And Lenore in no, where are you? Berlin at the moment. You're in Berlin.
Yes, I'm in Berlin at the moment. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello,
It's
making news.
hello. How are you doing? It's
I'm doing
so
all right.
quiet.
I
Yeah,
know.
I'm trying to listen to this on right up to my ear on the phone because it's just gone really quiet somehow when I've put my voice on it. It's gone so quiet. But you're enjoying yourself out there in Berlin, yeah? Brilliant. I'm sitting here. Hello?
Hey, Kenyos, I don't want to interrupt, but what's going on is when you jump on a stage on your phone, it connects to your ear speaker. So if you
Oh,
go on your
right.
phone and
Okay.
swipe up, there's a change audio output. I don't know what device you're on, but there's a way to like change the audio output to speakerphone, and you will
Right.
be set. I did the same thing myself the other day.
Right. Okay. So that's why it's gone really quiet. That's why I can't okay, give me 1 second. I'll see if I can try that. Hold on. I'm scared I'll just knock the whole thing off now, but I'll try. Hello. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm clear.
I can't. It's the whole thing's disappeared off the page now. I've got my phone in one hand with the internet switched off so that because I'm on my laptop trying to mint this lovely James piece that's just come up, but it's just on loading and I'm scared to touch it. I don't know what's happened there. They've probably all gone a long time ago, but it's probably just my laptop. I don't know. But is anybody else stuck on loading and trying to buy this on the Zingot marketplace? Okay. Yes, absolutely. Oh, she's just doing a brilliant, a brilliant thing because she's been, so brave. Everything that they've had to deal with, and just keep on fighting, keep on talking, keep on,
Well, I
you
just
know.
want to say, I'm not sure, Kinyozi, if I'm saying that correctly, but
Yeah.
one of my favorite queer people is from Wales. I
Oh,
don't know if
really?
you know her.
Right.
Her name is Jess Fishlock. She is
Okay. I'll.
a she is a women's footballer, soccer player. She is like
Wow.
probably has, if you look her up, you'll see
I'll
that
look her up.
you're not a
Yeah.
soccer fan, you might not know who she is, but she's like one of the most famous women's soccer players from Wales, and she's incredible.
Blimey.
And she plays for professionally for my team here in Seattle.
Oh, wow, good gods.
And
Right,
she also, yeah,
I'm gonna write her
you
name
gotta,
down right now.
yeah,
Jess Fishlock, and I'm gonna look her up, and I'll especially if she's so soccer as in football,
yep.
yeah, not rugby, because Wales, Wales is big on rugby as well. And I must admit, I'm not great on football, rugby.
Well, I
I
just,
watch a little bit of that, but I will
yeah,
look her up. So Jess Fishlock. Hold
yeah,
on.
I just put it into the flight deck chat for you. And sorry to everyone
Right.
else who doesn't care about soccer, but it's totally
Yeah,
on
well,
topic. But
I'll watch it if my team is playing. I'll watch it,
yeah, yeah. Well,
and if they're winning,
I shout out to Wales and shout out to your athletes who are out, because
yeah,
again, if I think back to when I came out more than 26 years ago, you know, we didn't have out athletes. We didn't really have very many out politicians. We didn't have any out business people. We didn't really have even anyone. This was before Ellen came out on television. There was
yeah,
not a lot of queer LGBT entertainers even that were out. You could count them on like one or two hands. So it's I just want to shout out to, everyone. It's not safe for everyone to come out. I totally understand that, especially in the work that I'm doing. Sometimes it is not
yeah,
safe, and everyone has their own journey. But I think that,
yeah,
we change the world because of activism and advocacy, and we also change the world by being ourselves and being known to ourselves and being visible and sharing that with other people in our lives when we can safely. And that's why, ParrotLady's story about caring about friends who are part of the LGBTQ community, and my own experience, my parents were not happy when I came out, and they were not supportive. But then
no,
10 years later, they came to and helped me have a wedding, and they're
mm,
really wonderful active grandparents. And I really think that changing people's hearts and minds by knowing people that we love who are different, and knowing that they're the same people. They're just human beings. And it doesn't really matter who they love, and it doesn't really matter how they identify and who they are. They're still the same human beings that we love. That is much what changes the world as activism and advocacy. So I always like to just say, in addition to what organizations like Outright and other gay organizations are doing, it's just people like you, people in our community who are willing to step up and share themselves, and people who can be allies and love them and support them is
yeah,
everything.
absolutely, absolutely. Have you ever been to Wales yourself?
I have been to Wales, but only but I didn't really get to spend any time there. I have remote part of my ancestry is from Wales. So many
Oh
years
yeah,
ago, I know many years ago, my family and I were in England, and then we actually like went for the afternoon. We went to Wales. We don't have any relatives there anymore, but we went
yeah,
kind of on a trip
brilliant,
with my grandparents, and visited some like old cemeteries and things. But
brilliant.
I really want to go back and spend time there.
Yeah, it's a great kind of just. I think it's a very universal place, especially where I live in Aberystwyth. I live in a university town, so we have people from all over the world, different people, different cultures, different, and that's why I think I love living here because nobody judges anybody for for any reason at all.
everyone, so that in case they want to go through a final round of
Okie
questions
dokie.
and see around. No, this is awesome, this conversation. I love it.
Yes. We can always follow up offline about about
Yeah,
the poll. But yeah, does
exactly.
anyone have any other questions about Outright or just our global movement, or I think any other questions about gay athletes?
This is great. But it seems like if you have any final words you want to say or anything, we'll just conclude things. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, on a personal level, again, do what you can do to support queer and trans artists and creators in this space. Like, that's another thing that's just been amazing for me, is getting to know a lot of them and their work, and like just showing up for them, and amplifying their work, supporting their work in this space, I think is a really great thing to do. I think being there, being yourself, if you're a part of the queer community, and to the extent you can, sharing that safely with people. And if you're an ally, standing up for being there and supporting and listening to and loving the LGBTQ people in your life is everything. And, from Outright side, I just want you to know that your support would mean so much to us and have a huge impact either on all of our programs, or if there's something in particular you heard me say that you really want to try to support, that's also very welcome. But what we need is more allies and more people to pay attention, get involved, and support what we're doing and support what our partners are doing. So even if you just learned enough to want to follow us and share when you see something, we'd be grateful for that support and that help spreading the word. And thanks so much for having me. Everyone is welcome to reach out to me on Twitter. Um, Feel free to DM me if you have any follow-up questions. I love what you're doing here. I love the other organizations that you're hearing from and supporting. And I'll be here cheering you on and watching what happens next either way. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a blast. Cheers.